I am very happy to give today's talk. My name is Festus Adedoyin. I am a lecturer at the Department of Computing and Informatics, the Faculty of Science and Technology, Bournemouth University. I'm going to be leading a conversation, I would say, today around the post-COVID-19 future of the UK economy. We'll also be looking at a couple of other economies, looking at some variables, or what I would say some issues for discussion. So this is going to be not too technical. I will do my best to make it not too technical so we can all understand and participate. So we have been hit by COVID-19, and if you read the news, if you listen to the radio, you might have heard how, employment has been affected, job losses. We've had the furlough scheme in the UK, and all sorts of efforts by the government to try to, support the economy. But what we will talk about today is, the content of my talk today is, first of all, I will look at what we're talking about, why we need to talk about this, and how can we answer some questions using some scientific tools. And then I will try to motivate why we're using machine learning. Thankfully, it seems like, the scientific world has prepared most economies for COVID. So prior to COVID, there have been new tools, new strategies, new techniques coming up, and then COVID hit. But with these tools, with these scientific tools, can we say, we can really make sense of the economy today? We will do a couple of trends, try to understand some facts from the data, look at some of the things that have happened globally. And then as a researcher, I will put my discussion in a theoretical framework just to contextualize our conversation today. And then we'll talk a little bit about some technical aspects of these scientific tools, which will involve, just showing you some of the forecasting procedures that I have adopted. And finally, I will present some results, and then we look at the future post-COVID. So if you're ready, let me start with what, why, and how. So what this talk is about is to apply what we call machine learning models to predict some macroeconomic variables. And what I mean by macroeconomic variables are the things we know about: consumption, national income, employment, things that affect everybody. But we will use some new tools that are evolving in the scientific world, just some new techniques to try to answer these questions. And why should we even care to talk about this? This contributes to the debate on what is best, or how best can we understand the economy. And then we can also see some guide for businesses, for local businesses, shops on our high streets, big businesses, small scale businesses, the national government planning strategies, and also local councils. So the council provides healthcare, provides plans for the budget, and all these things. So what we talk about today can actually help the local council as well to try to understand what the future looks like and what we should be really thinking about. This conversation today also looks at the also contributes to the BU Fusion project, where we try to one of the goals of Bournemouth University as a whole. So I'm just trying to give us some reasons why we need to talk about this. The data I will be using to apply to the scientific tools of machine learning are quarterly data. So we will take historical data from 1960 to 2020 for UK, US, and Brazil. I have, ignored India for now because of lack of data, and we'll try to predict these variables post COVID. Why should we? What does it mean when we, say machine and deep learning? Data science field has evolved recently. It's become something everybody's talking about due to the new tools available. Machine and deep learning goes very detailed into using some smart elements. So when we say machine learning, the tools that we have, the scientific tools that we have now, provide a smart way to actually interact with the data. So there is data everywhere. Every day we create data when we go to the coffee shop, when we swipe our cards on the machine, when we get on the bus. Everything we create data, even when we pay for our credit cards, when we pay for our bills, everything we do, we're actually generating lots of data. And machine learning actually presents a very rich way to make sense of this data, a very rich way, a smart way to interact with this volume of data that we have. Machine learning also helps develops, fast algorithms that are efficient, build models that are data driven to predict and see forward and plan for the future. Machine learning can also help, adapt from previous computation. So it could learn from what has been done in the past and try to see again what the future will look like. It can produce reliable results. It can produce results that can be repeated, decisions that can easily be repeated. Um, so this is one of the motivation for adopting these tools. There have been existing tools before now that are quite uh, uh, they have been efficient in the past, but with the development in machine learning, we find that there are new tools that are smarter, easy to use, and if understood, can help understand the future. Let me go into a little bit of some stylized facts, some of the things that actually motivate this discussion today. Looking at the data from the Johns Hopkins Coronavirus Resource Center, they provide data on number of deaths per 1,000, 100,000 population. And if you look at the graph on the left, I have the data on number of deaths per 100,000 population in orange color. And it shows that, of course, India has a lot of deaths, but because of the huge population, it has a low deaths per 100,000 population. But the US, Brazil, India, Mexico, the UK have consistently have the top highest number of deaths in the world. That is as of early May. Of course, this virus is still revolving, new variants, new waves, and so hopefully the deaths will reduce. But this is the current state of the number of deaths as at early May. And some of the issues that we look at when we look at how the impact of COVID has been. The details you have on the right talking about employment. This is from the UK data. The Office of the National Statistics says that the number of online jobs have been higher in 2021. The number of investment has also increased. Business trade has increased in 2021 above 2020 and 2019. That shows some form of recovery, which is good. Government spending have initially increased during the beginning of the lockdown, the very first lockdown. But as of April 2021, this has fallen compared to last year, 2020. Um, Tourism, of course, as we all know, many of us have holidays booked. Maybe we're still unable to go, or we're still planning to go for summer. But we see that there's been a consistent fall. And these are some of the things we find in the data, what the data tells us. We will see a little bit more details about the behavior of the data since the COVID-19. And then we move into using machine learning to see what the future looks like, and then we open up for discussions on these issues. But I just wanted to really address some of the main issues that we will be talking about in our conversation today. Of course, I mentioned earlier that I have a theoretical framework on which this discussion is based, and that is the standard representation, the mathematical calculation of gross domestic product that looks at the overall economy, and then breaks it down into different chunks. So it looks at household consumption, looks at how household contributes to the overall economy, how businesses contribute to the overall economy, how the government spending as well contributes to the overall economy, and how international trade, which I have omitted in this case for brevity, how international trade as well contributes to the overall economy. So these are the trends that we want to talk about to predict adopting machine learning models. Again, we will look at this in the next few slides to just look at some of the hit that COVID-19 has given to the economy overall. And to start with, let us just take a look at the growth, economic growth, and consumption. On the left, we see the overall economy, and this is just a comparison between the UK and the US. Again, for brevity, we find that between 2018 and 2019, the very first quarter, there has been a consistent sort of upward trend. But with the advent of COVID, with the lockdown, this is not news. We can see from the data as well that the overall there's a huge dip in the overall economic growth, and of course we can all relate to this. But then we see that from the second quarter of 2020, we see that there has been some form of recovery in terms of overall economic growth. And if we split this down into consumption, we see that consumption has actually, for the United States, consumption has actually maintained a smooth pattern, while for the UK, consumption had a little bit of dip in the second quarter of 2020. And of course, for the UK, we might know of the furlough scheme where the government tried to create some form of support for workers, and also the Eat Out to Help Out scheme to try to support businesses. And all of these might have contributed. So we're not looking at why this is happening. We're looking at the future, what, based on the data, based on the history, what can the government then do, to either keep up with the momentum or try to recover to its pre-COVID-19 levels. Let's also just take a little more look about three more variables: investment on the left and consumption on the right. So we find that investment has demonstrated a little bit of upward and downward trend, particularly for the UK. But again, unlike the overall economy that has a dip at the early stages of the COVID-19 pandemic, we find that towards the mid of, there's a little bit of delay for investment. And that delay moved the dip a little bit towards the end of 2020, towards mid 2020, and some form of recovery going forward towards the end of 2020. And consumption expenditure, that's government spending, I beg your pardon, has also increased. So these are just some of the trends. I wouldn't spend too much time on these. These are just some of the trends to demonstrate how the data has behaved. The one that actually attracts my attention the more is employment, which is not news because we find that there has been a very sharp fall in employment, the number of people that are engaged in some form of jobs. But unlike other variables, employment has not recovered. And this is a little bit striking for the UK because if there continually be a dip in employment, then that might mean some very serious implications on the economy. Now, let's now move forward into the conversation today, looking at what COVID-19 has said, the economy, how it's affected the economy. We try to then look at some form of forecasting tools that can actually help us to make sense of the data. I have put here some explanation of the modeling process, and I'm not going to bother you with the details. These are just some of the pre-estimation checks that should be done when you do a scientific forecasting using machine learning. You need to verify that the data is all intact. This has all been done. And then the particular emphasis is on the forecasting model. So we start with a naive model. A naive model that just basically looks at the recent history and try to force the data to look at the future based on recent history. But then we also look at the ARIMA model. That is as far as this conversation covers for today. But also going forward, there's also the prophet model. These are all machine learning models. The prophet model, the long short-term memory, LSTM, which can actually help verify or serve as a sensitivity analysis check for whatever predictions that we make with the ARIMA model. So, and then for model evaluation, to evaluate the model, we look at the mean squared errors to assess how the model has performed. If the forecast actually matches or is good enough for what we want to use it for. For the software platform, for this conversation, for this data analysis, we've used Python programming language, but you can also use R, you can use Stata. There are all kinds of platforms that can be used. I've just put this there just to demonstrate the various types of platforms. Um, so with a couple of minutes left, I will just briefly describe the persistence model or naive model. It's a naive model, just uses a reference baseline model, uses the last observation, say, for example, the last quarter, to force the data to look into the future. Again, it is a very naive model, but can be used for comparison, basically. But to go deep into the ARIMA model, the ARIMA model comprises of three different components, I would say: the moving average, the autoregressive model, and then the I, which is the integrated, which then brings the autoregressive integrated moving average together as one. And it's a very easy model to use, but very powerful. It can't be ignored. There are so many advancements to this model, but we use the generalization of the moving average and the autoregressive model to look into our forecast. So the benefit of this model is we can understand the data, we can understand the behavior of the data historically, and then we can look forward from the data. Um, ARIMA model, again, the steps are very easy. We define some specific features of the model and then prepare the model to be trained, to train the data, and then make predictions. So again, machine learning allows us to do this. Deep learning also, which is the recurrent neural network, RNN, the LSTM and the prophet models, they can also do this in more advanced way. So let me just dive into the performance so I could spend time on the results as well. To look into the performance of the model. In terms of the naive model, which is the persistence model, we compare three economies together, and all of the variables demonstrate that the forecast, the ARIMA model we use, or the naive model, both of them are able to actually predict the future. So they perform very well. The mean squared error, the standard for the mean squared error is to uh, ensure that the lower the value of the mean square error, the confident you are that your model is perfect or can make some perfect predictions of the future. I have omitted employment for Brazil due to lack of data. The time period is quite short for that to happen. So we find that all these variables, all these macroeconomic indicators, economic growth measured by GDP, in this case, employment, consumption, government spending or government expenditure, and investment, all perform very well based on our model. Now, let's look into some of the results, some of the um, expressions of our model. So we find that for the United Kingdom and the USA, they have quite a similar pattern in terms of the economic growth. So both economies seem to have a similar response and potentially different divergence in our forecast. So you see the orange and the blue line. The orange line shows us the true values, the forecast, while the blue line, light blue line, shows us um, the true values of the data. And from what we have, we find that there seems to be different movement. They move a little bit in different directions. And the dip we have, again, from the data, economic growth, if you remember from the previous slides, economic growth has a huge dip in itself. And then we find that the forecast for the United Kingdom and the USA, the United Kingdom seems to maintain that dip, while the US seems to have some smooth forecast for the overall economic growth. For consumption, we have quite a different behavior. There seems to be some variance again between the US and the United Kingdom for consumption patterns. I'm just showing some of these trends, but we will have a bit of a conversation around why this might be so, why this might be the case. Again, we see that there seems to be divergence between these two economies. Um, and then we see again that there's also an additional divergence in employment. Employment seems to forecast a continuous trend, but again, like we see from the true value, the true data, there's a huge dip in employment for the United Kingdom. There seems to be no recovery for employment, particularly, and that is one of the key shocking findings, I would say, from this study, to see that can we argue then that nothing or the government is not doing enough for employment if there seems to be a focus on consumption, and of course consumption drives which I will just move forward a little bit to see consumption drives investment as well. So if people buy the product during the lockdown, there's been quite increase in ordering from Amazon, from eBay, and from online platforms, lots of delivery services, and there seems to be some form of increase or maintenance of consumption, and that also translates to investments, because then investors can actually see their products being bought and produce more. But that is not translating to employment, so that seems to be there's a discord there. If consumption helps boost investment as much as it should, but employment is not gaining any momentum, it's not actually recovering, still maintaining a dip, particularly for the UK, then that seems to be to lead to some issues in the problem. And for government expenditure, again, we see that the forecast seems to be in this case below the true values, but it just shows a consistent pattern for government expenditure, and that's reasonable because we will expect that basic services continue to be provided. Every basic services, healthcare services, and other kinds of services, the government still needs to be responsible in providing those. For investment, again, as I said, investment seems to have in fact, for the United States, it seems to have an upward trend, while for the UK, it seems to fluctuate, but it also show a recovery pattern for the United Kingdom. And that, again, seems to provide some issues around why employment still has a huge dip despite the potentials for recovery. And to just spend a little bit of time talking about some of the conversation around what each of these variable entails, or going a little bit deeper into each of these variables. And if we look at consumption, again, household spending has maintained its momentum. Household spending, there has been enough support, I would argue, from the data to show that people are still able to afford or spend either by borrowing, of course, but household consumption seems to be recovering. And of course, domestic tourism is also, particularly for the UK, is also or tourism in general, not necessarily domestic tourism, but tourism in general seem to be international tourism seems to be one of the spending, but that is also in form of an export because people take this money out of the UK. But in 2020, there seems to be a form of domestic tourism, and I remember in Bournemouth there was a massive, outpour of people on the beach in 2020 during the summer, and we had, I think there was an alert from the government to say that there's a serious issue with tourism, and a lot of people in Bournemouth, nearly or more than 500,000 people came to Bournemouth for domestic tourism. So that might have contributed significantly to consumption pattern. But also, if we move on to government spending, then we begin to ask some very serious questions here. To say, if we really want to predict the future and really try to understand and move towards pre-COVID-19 levels or even recover beyond that level, how viable then is it for the government to continually borrow to finance public services? This is actually not a debate covered in this talk, in this conversation, but I think it's something that can actually contribute to the future of this research, because these are real questions that we want to ask. Is it viable to continue to borrow to finance public services, particularly considering the behavior of employment, which seems not to be recovering? And again, that is one of the key shocker from this conversation. What is the future of taxes post COVID? Again, investment taxes, income taxes. The taxes seems to be the mainstay for the government. But are there other form of sources for revenue for the government? And if I just go back a little bit, just one step, we find that there seems to be that upward trend in the orange line for the United Kingdom. There seems to be that upward trend. Again, we cannot compare, the US directly with the UK, but we're not comparing in terms of the modeling, but in terms of the data. So this is more about just applying the scientific tools to the data. So we see that upward trend in government spending. And if I just move on, because of our time, if I move on to investment, we find again that there seems to be a need for more support more support for investors to try to create that avenue for investors to be able to recover. But again, we can break this further down a little bit to think about what kind of investors are we talking about? Are these still the big investors, or are we talking about small scale businesses? As obviously one of the main hits of COVID on the economy has been that we have so many closures of small businesses. If you walk along Winton, for example, in Bournemouth, you would find lots of small businesses that have been closed, due to the impact of the pandemic, restaurants and all kinds of small businesses. So again, distilling a little bit further, to know what kind of supports will be available for investors. And could this answer the employment problem that this research is posing? If employment seems to still maintain a dip, it's still going down, the level of the number of people engaged in active employment is going down, and the future seems to demonstrate that will continue to go down, then does it mean that small businesses are the actual drivers of employment? So care homes in Bournemouth, for example, restaurants, delivery services, and small businesses, saloons, and all of these small businesses that employ people. Are they the kind of businesses the government should pay more emphasis on? So these are more issues that the data will tell us a little bit further as we carry on this research. And then finally, we can also then talk about what are some of the future of this research. So the intention is to still try to validate this data, try to validate this analysis further, to examine the profit model, examine the gated recurrent unit model. These are all scientific tools, machine learning models that can help really see what the future look like, or solidify some of the arguments that I present in this research. Another thing I would just like to mention again is that although the overall performance of the economy is captured by these variables and these models we have talked about, and of course there are internal workings of each of these variables, several policies, several changes in government strategies, and the overall economy that can actually guide or dictate how each variables will behave and how they will contribute to the overall economy, but also international trade, which this is not covered. This doesn't cover. And international trade, is very important for most economies. Financial services, health services, services, goods being exported and imported within the EU, outside the EU, new India, UK trade deals, and all of these other issues all matter. So I wouldn't just want us to look at the data alone, but to also say that there are internal workings of each of these variables that help us try to understand how the economy will look like going forward. Um, there is something about investment. I will just mention 1 minute as I round up. Is about gross fixed capital formation. There are issues on land improvements, plant and machinery. I remember that the government tried to keep up with the buildings, people who are engaged in buildings during the lockdown, because land, machinery, construction, they are also very vital to keep, because they are the mainstay, construction of roads, railways, offices, hospitals, residential homes, residential dwellings, and all these places are also sort of serve as a shock to the entire economy as a whole. So I just wanted to mention that as well, just so we just have a full picture of what the conversation looks like. I think my time is up. Thank you very much. Look forward to your questions. Thank you. Over to you, Sharon.
Thank you very much, Festus, for a fascinating insight into how the economy is working. So we're just going to take a 5-minute break, then we'll come back straight after that. Okay, thanks everyone. Okay, welcome back everyone. So Festus, we've got a couple from Tom Harrison. And the first one being, can the models take into account government initiatives, such as the furlough scheme in the UK or stimulus checks in the US?
Thank you very much, Tom. That's a very, very good question. Yes, the short answer to that is yes. The model can actually accommodate the impact of this sort of stimulus package, or some furlough scheme, or government support in general. In fact, I did wanted to also try to solve that, particularly testing for the Eat Out to Help Out scheme, and to really see if this actually helped restaurants and businesses in particular. But of course, one of the things that limits this searches, or this studies, is that you can't easily find the data, and these are still evolving. The situation is still evolving, and sometimes you need time to really capture the real impact of such schemes. So the short answer to that is yes, but again, that will depend on availability of data and enough time to allow for this the schemes to have some form of effect. In the past, so just to add to that, in the past there have been some checks. So during the 2007, 8, 9 global financial crisis, there were some real impact. But again, some of the models we have now, some of the scientific tools that are available now were not really developed at that time. They were still in their primary primitive stage. But now we seem to have these scientific tools, and they are really very helpful to really see into the future, to know what impact this will have. Some of these schemes, like the furlough scheme, have come in different forms. They may be similar to past support schemes, but they come in new forms. For example, the way it's designed, the group of people it targets, and the volume as well that is available, and how companies can benefit from it, or businesses can benefit from it. And so all of these issues can be modeled using machine learning. Yes.
I think that's part of the problem with all of this, isn't it, Festus, that we're living in what essentially is a massive big experiment at the moment. And there's so much data coming in, be it from, the epidemiology, numbers of ill people and all that sort of thing, and how things are recovering from the evolution of new strains of the virus and all sorts of things.
Yeah.
It's just trying to keep up with everything that's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
So, and a similar thing, and I think it probably slots in, the second question from Tom was around, can the models be used to decide, sorry, it's moving, the screen's moving, when such initiatives should be stopped and when government expenditure should be reduced?
Government expenditure reducing seems to be far-fetched. It might not happen. That's basically because the government will always continue to spend. Um, it's a different question to know where to spend. So the models can help advise the government on spending in the correct quarters. But again, in terms of volume, government spending will continue to rise. However, to know when the schemes to advise when such initiatives should stop, that would actually, in some cases, last into uh, years, really. To be honest, it will carry on because it's like you're training a child to walk. It will stop. You will stop at some point to stop training the child to walk because obviously they will pick up themselves and they'll start, running and maybe flying. But it will take a while, really, to see how businesses respond. So some people will take the scheme, take the money, and leave the business. Some people will take the money and still close up. So you can't really predict exactly when to stop, but you can predict the direction of how the government should spend and in what. It seems my video has stopped. Sorry. um, so I'm just gonna check. So you can't actually predict when the government should stop, but you can just make it clear exactly what direction the money should go into. So I think that is what I would imagine. I would imagine that you can predict to say pump money into this sector at this point in time for the next 6 months and switch into this other sector for the next 5 months, due to what we see, due to the history um, of this particular sector. Say, for example, the tourism industry. If you keep up with the eat out to help out scheme, for example, when people have their eyes on Portugal or they have their eyes to go to Spain, go to Ibiza and go enjoy themselves, there's no point really to keep, and so all of these are still ongoing. You can show the direction with this model, but you may not be able to stop the spending pattern.
There's another interesting one from Steve, and that's saying it looks like the model's predictions tend towards the status quo. Is that true?
It tends towards the status code.
Yeah,
I'm trying to see what does that mean. That means it what is known. Is that what it?
yeah. The sort of the no change to the situation type thing.
Yes, yes, yes. All of the well, not all. Most of these variables seems to be saying what is expected already, except employment. And that's one thing that is actually shocking because you would expect that with the support, something is really wrong, particularly for the UK. Unlike the US, the UK seems to continually go down, and that is not what is expected. The prediction is that, in line with the other variables, there should be some form of recovery as well for the number of people who get their jobs back or who get their a new job, as it were. One of the qualitative evidence I see for this research, something more practical, is that I find that at the beginning of the first lockdown, and I think towards 6 months into the lockdown, most people switch jobs into from professional jobs to maybe support work or care work or other sort of daily jobs, as it were. And that might be because some people took the follow scheme and still try to switch job and or I ended up leaving job. And so there's a lot of things, there's a lot of issues going on with employment. But again, that is one thing that sort of beats the status quo, beats my expectation really. Employment, other variables seems to be as expected, um, going forward into the future. But again, as the government has said, we haven't gotten back to our pre-COVID-19 levels. So we might be heading towards that point, but we are not there yet.
I think the interesting thing about employment as well is people have had time to think, haven't they, and evaluate their situation. So quite often it could be that people have realised that they've been just sticking to the job that they're in because it's there.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
actually, with all of this, it's made us realise that
I need to change
things,
my job.
things can change, and perhaps you need to be in somewhere where you're more happy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's true. That's true. And those are some of the things, Sharon, that the data cannot capture. Really.
Exactly.
Mm,
That, and as you say, those are situations where hopefully there are qualitative studies that are coming out to
yeah,
actually support some of what we're seeing with the hard numbers,
yeah.
but actually getting more information through talking to people
Absolutely,
will hopefully enhance what we're seeing.
absolutely.
Um, there's one from Murray Cohen that there's a misconception that banks are too big to fail. Are there any ARIMA models for bank failures?
For bank failures,
Yeah.
um, I'm not sure I got that clearly.
Are there any models that
Mm.
to sort of model whether or not banks are strong? I assume
Oh, yeah.
is
Oh,
where
okay.
this conversation's going. But
If banks are strong.
yes, yes.
Ah, yeah.
Sorry, dodgy accent.
Yeah, no, that's okay. That's okay, Sharon. That's a good question, really, because from history we find that there's a theory of too big to fail, and uh, these are companies that very large corporations that end up failing, and the government do their best and say, "Come on, try to revive it and resuscitate." um, but yes, there are some indicators that there are higher risks at this time, particularly with borrowing. So there are more risks. So what I again, back to qualitative, I like to just bring that up because that's the best way we can actually understand. Um, I observed personally during the second lockdown, just towards the end of 2020, we find more credit cards, more borrowing, more offers. So even with your poor credit score, I find a couple of people saying, "Oh, there's more credit cards, more increase in credits limits," and then you see all of these. It just shows that something may not be right. And again, if you look at the models we've used, Arima or be it Prophet model or any kind of model, if we come back to the real story, there seems to be higher risks with COVID, and that's not news because I mean it's obvious. Some people may default and claim for bankruptcy and all of these. There are potentials around it, but that also means that in terms of volume, uh, credits and banks and loan facilities seems to be on the increase, particularly for volume. And so there's a need to be very cautious in that area. I hope that makes sense, Sharon.
Yeah, yeah, no, it does. And I think we've seen, as you say, over the past 10 years or so, the fact that yes, some banks can fail.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So welcome to Andrew, who's joining us from Istanbul.
Oh,
And he says, thanks for your very relevant insights. And his question is, what motivated your choice of case and country selection?
oh, okay. Thank you. That's a very good question. Although I did mention earlier that there were five countries with higher debts, higher total number of debts. And if I just move very quickly, just to show you that again.
I think Andrew joined us after the first couple of slides. So
Oh, okay. So yeah, so there are cases, countries with very high cases as of early May, and again, this is still evolving. Hopefully, we don't have more deaths. Hopefully, with more vaccines and everything. But we seem to have, these countries with very high deaths. And but I've chosen this, the US and the UK, basically because they have, similar economic structures. Of course, they're different in so many other areas. But just for the purpose of analysis, in the full analysis I have done for India and sorry, for Brazil and for Mexico as well. But again, we can't cover all these countries in our conversation. So that's why this has been restricted. And for employment, that couldn't be assessed for because not all countries actually have data. So and you need with machine learning. That's one of the challenges with these new tools. the bigger the data, the better. It's not a challenge really, but it just means you're limited with how many issues you can analyze with machine learning or deep learning. The more data you have, the better, and there are all kinds of data everywhere. So that's why we couldn't go for employment for Brazil. But yes, that motivated the idea to see if the number of deaths, and you would imagine the number of deaths, employment, again, for this research, that's still one of the shock I keep coming back to, because it's really shocking for me. You would expect that employment would really pick up quicker, because consumption hasn't really gone down. Consumption has picked up, investment is going okay, so employment seems to be going down, and the number of deaths doesn't, well, we haven't tested that in this research, but if we'll check, we would find it seems to be biased towards the older population, and the population with in terms of the COVID-19 number of deaths. But again, yeah, that's the motivation for the selection for countries. Yeah.
So, somewhat related to this, we've had a question that's round about how much data do you think you would need to have a statistically significant result using your model?
Okay, that's a good question. I think the maximum from my data set is about 275. I can, yeah, just about 275 or more. That's quarterly data from 1960 to 2020 December. Um, but if you have as many as you can have, really, that in some cases might still not be enough, but I think it's okay. But again, it depends on the nature of your variables. So these are national variables. And as Sharon mentioned earlier, we might need some surveys, some interviews, some questionnaires, to really go deeper. And if you have surveys that spans into thousands of data points, then that would even give us more answer, more relatable answers to these issues, because we really need to dive deeper to know why. We have seen what the data is saying and how the future might look like, but why are this happening? What is accounting for this? And so the more data you have, the better. I would say 250, 300, depending on what you're looking at. In some other variables, you might be lucky to find daily data. In fact, data of seconds and milliseconds. There are data, up to milliseconds, particularly in the stock market. And all of these are, some ingredients for this kind of scientific tools. They are very delighted when they see lots of data because then you can make very good predictions.
It's like a big data set.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
again, it does come down to that whole thing, doesn't it? That the data are evolving, and we don't know where it's going to go. Really, it's the case of we're learning from it every day, aren't we?
Yeah.
There's some quite complicated technical questions that I'm not being rude not asking them, but this just isn't really the forum for it. I don't know, I think if Beverly's around, perhaps you can, I think what will happen is after the event, if you've registered for the event, you will get an email just around about what you thought of the event and stuff like that. Festus, if you're okay with your contact details being in that,
Yep,
so that
absolutely.
if people are wanting to have discussions round about Markov switching models and things like that, I think that's the forum to do it rather than in this, because we don't want to lose the whole of the audience.
Yes.
I don't know are there any other questions that are coming out? I think I've got most of them. I'm just having a check. One of them is if you had more details on the errors that are of the variables that are in the model during the pandemic, would that confirm the validity of the results? Does that make sense?
Uh, During
So
the
knowing more about the error, I assume, around about the variables that you're looking at within the model.
okay, the errors around the model. the variables.
Yeah.
Okay, I will try to answer the way I think this person is saying. But again, as you've said, yeah, I'm happy to take more questions, after this.
I think these are better to be email questions that
Yeah,
rather than what's involved in this evening, because this evening's about having a wide range of people in the
yeah,
audience.
yeah,
For those of you that might have missed the beginning part of it, we're not a specialist talk. It's for members of the public,
mm,
and so that everybody can get involved. So I don't think there are any other questions that we've got here. So I think it will just be up to saying thank you very much for a very interesting talk.
thank you.
And we all look forward to, hopefully look forward to what data are coming out as we progress through this, and hopefully start coming out the other side. And yeah, we look forward to seeing what that clearer picture is
Yeah,
with
yeah,
lots of other types of data
yeah,
involved.
yeah. Thank you very much, Sharon. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your talk this evening.
Thank you,
And
Sharon.
thank you to everybody that's attended. And we hope we'll see you at Cafe Sai sometime soon. Thank you.
Thank you.